Today we're going to talk about 10 video game sequels that ruined the story of the first game. For the sake of this video, ruined is kind of a broad term. It can retroactively make the story worse, or just completely change it up, retcon things, shake things up. Either way, this is an interesting one, so buckle up. We got 10 games to talk about, so let's get started off with number 10, with StarCraft 2. And to be honest, like a lot of games that are going to show up in this video, like StarCraft 2 is not a bad game at all, don't get it twisted. It's just a bit of a disappointing follow-up to the original game's story. This game is the perfect example of old versus new Blizzard. You know, the quality of writing going from the 1998 original to the sequel is noticeable. I'm not even saying that the story of the first StarCraft is like this all-time masterpiece or anything, you know, but the writing of the first game is intentionally pulpy while still having some immediate depth to the world. More characters, shifting alliances that expanded the universe, the setting, and pretty interesting ways. And the expansion pack, Brood War, really widened the StarCraft setting in some interesting ways that were just begging to be followed up on. You know, the hype was unbelievably high for StarCraft 2 when they finally got around to putting it out so many years later. And the first campaign, Wings of Liberty, was pretty well regarded. I liked it, even if the plot seemed to kind of regress rather than expand. But with each subsequent entry in the StarCraft 2 saga, opinions on the overall direction of the plot kinda soured. It's not just that Kerrigan, who ended Brood War as the ultimate villain, is ultimately given the classic Blizzard mind wipe and, turned good in the Zerg campaign.
Yep, like riding a bike.
Or that the bad guy feels like something out of World of Warcraft more than anything. It's that the characters are all static from the original StarCraft appearances. The story never really moves forward in any significant way, which is the opposite to how the first StarCraft did things. In that first game, events were constantly shifting, characters were introduced and killed off. The overall state of the universe changed a lot in that one game. But in 2, it felt like very little actually happened. They saved the absolute big thing for the ending, which gets so cartoonish and kind of lame that it's almost possible to describe. Kerrigan becomes a glowy star god to fight the evil darkness man. It's incredibly goofy, kind of fantasy nonsense that just doesn't feel quite right in the OG sci-fi StarCraft setting.
Once and for all.
On top of that, all that stuff, like a lot of the plot threads introduced in Brood War were kind of ignored. Gameplay-wise, again, StarCraft 2 is incredible. It's fantastic, and the campaigns are some of the best made for an RTS, just in terms of like setting, scenario, mechanics, all that. But the actual storytelling ruins some of the concepts introduced in the first game. It squanders some potential. Now at number 9, Condemned 2. Bloodshot, the follow-up to like one of my favorite games, just an underrated, cool horror game. So think of it this way. If the first Condemned game was like David Fincher's Seven, then Condemned 2, Bloodshot, is kind of like a Slipknot music video. Like all that creepy lore you discovered in the first game, all that slow burn detective stuff, it was all leading up to this. It's not just that the sequel is so blatantly extreme and very 2000s, or that it's going for a more in-your-face, kind of obvious kind of horror compared to the more subtle first game. It's also that the story teased in the first game just goes completely off the rails. I wouldn't blame anyone for assuming that this sequel had like nothing to do with the original. I mean, just look at the protagonists from the first game compared to the sequel. They're apparently the same guy, but they might as well just be a new character for how much they have to do with the original. There was a lot, he went through a lot, and I think the game was trying to reflect that, but it didn't really land. We got a whole lot more lore in Condemned 2 regarding the cult, and I kind of wish that we hadn't, because the more you learn about these guys, it's like the less scary they become. Sometimes less is more, and Condemned 2 Bloodshot really throws that all away. The stuff that was vague and creepy and mysterious in the first game is revealed to be kind of lame as hell here, with like a whole lot of proper nouns like the invincible voice and the rememdium. In gameplay terms, it is a better game than the original. Some of the beatdown stuff is awesome. They made melee combat more complex and satisfying, and there's some good levels in here. So it's not a total failure or anything, but man, does the story go in some unsatisfying directions, and you really lose that good sense of subtle horror that the first game kinda had. The first game was grounded and kind of realistic. Yeah, it escalated towards the end, but most of the game was grounded and kind of realistic. But Condemned 2, has like the president of the United States being revealed as a member of the evil cult. It's absurd and ridiculous, and it sounds like it's absurd in a fun way, but it just kind of falls flat. Next at number 8, Overwatch 2. And usually with lists like this, the title is kind of intentional hyperbole. A sequel is never going to literally ruin the story of the first game because it's a sequel. It's not the same game. The story of the original is still there if you want it, and it's not taking anything away from you, right? When people say stuff like this, they're exaggerating for emotional effect, but with Overwatch 2, it's just kind of like, what happened? Blizzard literally erased the original game and replaced it with Overwatch 2. It was always a bad, consumer, unfriendly idea. It was very convoluted at the time. It felt like they didn't know what they were doing, but at least they were going to greatly expand the story of Overwatch by including a campaign-like story mode that could be played cooperatively. With Overwatch 1, it was widely considered one of Blizzard's biggest mistakes that they didn't capitalize on the story of the game. I mean, people loved the character shorts, the characters themselves, and they desperately wanted more stories with these cool characters in this cool world that they were really attached to. But Blizzard just completely fumbled and failed to capitalize on the potential of that setting. They made a few PvE modes and maps, but they barely pushed the story ahead, and it all ended up feeling like a missed opportunity. So when Overwatch 2 was actually announced, there was some excitement from the community that they were rectifying past wrongs and, bringing the story back right up to the forefront. And then they completely canceled the campaign mode that everybody wanted, and they released Overwatch 2 anyway. So now it's not just a disappointing sequel that doesn't follow up on the original story in a satisfying way, it completely erased the meager story we got even in the first one. To be at least a little fair to Overwatch 2, it's not like they've completely given up on PvE, but what they've put out so far is a shadow of what was originally promised. As fun as Overwatch 2 is to play, well, we will give them that, the campaign, the story stuff, it still stings. Now at number 7, this was coming, Metroid Other M. This is a game it's hard to feel all that strongly about anymore, now that we've gotten more than one proper Metroid sequel, so it's not like this thing killed the franchise or anything. I mean, these days, Metroid Other M is more of a bizarre oddity than some big black mark against the series. They tried to turn Metroid into Metal Gear Solid, and like most of the games that attempted to do that, they failed badly. And while Metroid Other M is stated by the creator to be a sequel to Super Metroid, the game that this one actually manages to ruin somewhat is actually Metroid Fusion. Sure, the flashback stuff to the ending of Super Metroid is pretty embarrassing with Samus's monotone voiceover here.
Why am I still alive? A baby.
The real character assassination is what happens to Adam. See, in Metroid Fusion, Samus reveals that she had a commanding officer named Adam, and in that game, he comes off as a pretty cool dude. Other M is actually a prequel to Fusion, so we get to meet the guy, and he just kind of sucks. Like, that's it. You only ever heard about him from Samus's perspective in Fusion, so it was always kind of going to be hard to come up with a character that managed to live up to that hype, or just like what you would kind of assume of that character. But they absolutely just totally failed to make him even remotely likable in Other M. He just comes off like a tedious jerk in the game. Look, Adam is far from the only story crimes perpetuated by Other M, but he's the guy that Fusion spent some of the game boosting. So finding out that he was always just some boring asshole, it just kind of ruins whatever they were trying to say about him previously. What a waste. Next at number 6, Crackdown 2. Look, at the end of Crackdown 1, we find out this pretty surprising and shocking truth. The agency, the organization that moved into the city to clean up the crime and who was, commanding you, that whole thing, they were actually evil. Wow, what a revelation. The game with no story really tried to have a twist ending, and it was cool. I mean, but whatever. It was like really one of the only creative routes they could have taken. It's a great game, but there's barely any story to speak of. And then Crackdown 2 comes along and somehow still finds a way to make that worse. So what happens in the sequel is that 10 years after liberating the city, this new freak virus has spread and turned the town into a post-apocalyptic wasteland that's basically the same as it was in the first game, only uglier and less fun to play around in now. So to make a short story even shorter, you play through the game and find out the shocking truth that the agency was actually evil again.
That's one hell of a trial run. With Sunburst in full effect, the agency expansion plan is back on track. I pity anyone who stands in our way.
Yeah, it's the exact same twist as the original game, only it makes even less sense. Apparently, the agency taking over the city the first time wasn't enough to stick. They actually had to wait around for 10 years with their thumbs up their butts and do nothing, and then arbitrarily dropping a zombie plague on the city. So I guess they could take over the city that they already took over in the last game. I don't know what happened. It's so lame that it sounds like a parody of a lazy sequel, but that's what they did here. If it was just the story being lame, then who would even care? Nobody is playing these games for the story that much anyway, but it just felt so egregiously silly and half-assed that they just give the sequel the exact same twist as the first game. It's kind of audacious. Like, you have to have a lot of nerve to do something like that, man. Next at number 5, Prince of Persia: Warrior Within. Now, with any given sequel, you need to add additional conflict. You gotta up the stakes. So while it seemed like the prince was able to reverse time and fix everything at the end of the Sands of Time, something bad has to happen again if they want to make a sequel. Still, it felt like they kind of went way overboard with it in Warrior Within, the Godsmack-infused sequel that kind of threw all the charming Arabian Nights fairy tale storytelling of the original game for a heaping helping of mid-2000s edgy stuff. So many game sequels at this time tried to completely reinvent the wheel by turning, previously lighthearted and colorful games into brown, gray, brooding, violent games. And, it worked sometimes, and sometimes it didn't. But it just felt like the Prince of Persia series got hit with that 2000s, grunge stick pretty hard. The sequel reveals that the prince's time shenanigans at the end of the first game actually made his life a living hell. Now he's being hunted by this unkillable time monster, and because of that, he now looks kind of like a bad guy. He calls people bitch, and he broods a lot.
You bitch!
The Empress will leave.
It takes the satisfying ending of the first game and turns it on its head to make something that just kind of feels like more of a downer. Still, that being said, as much as it kind of undoes some of the fun triumph of that original game, Warrior Within is still a really fun game if you take it on its own. It's got some really cool moments, some good boss battles, but it is definitely a hell of a departure, and it feels a little goofy now. Still, it's got a special place in my heart. Maybe it's nostalgia. I don't know. Now at number 4, Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2. That big post-credits reveal at the end of the first Lords of Shadow game was actually pretty crazy. You had to be there, man. They teased a Castlevania game set in the modern day where you played as Dracula. It's completely different from what we've come to expect from this series, but Lords of Shadow actually ended pretty strong, and there was hope that the sequel could be even better. Even if you weren't fully on board with this God of War style series reboot, it was hard not to get excited about what the possibilities could be, especially if you love vampires. Then the sequel finally happened, and what do I even have to say here, man? Mercury Steam managed to make some improvements to the combat. It could have been a better game, but like there's so many awkward, misguided choices here. Why did they decide to open the game with Dracula explicitly murdering an innocent family? What's with all the stealth in the future segments? Because that is not really what we thought we were getting, right? Like Dracula just kind of sneaking around cybernetic doom monsters in techie hallways. The future parts often barely even feel like a Castlevania game. Look, maybe it was foolish to expect better, but that cliffhanger at the end of the first game was pretty hype, man. It was awesome. But the follow-through was unfortunately kind of lame. After a point, it kind of felt like, what are we even doing here? Now at number 3, Chrono Cross. Few games elicit as complicated feelings as this one. The game has a lot of positives. You know, the art is generally excellent, the music is some of the best, it's stylish and bold, and you gotta respect them for trying to do something different. But even with all that, the game is forever living in the massive shadow of Chrono Trigger, widely considered to be like one of the best RPGs of all time. So as a sequel, Cross doesn't just fall short, it kind of is a major disappointment. On its own terms, there's a lot to like, but rare few parts where the story directly calls back to Chrono Trigger are lame, kind of needlessly cruel and just kind of dumb and confusing. For fans of the original, Cross can feel kind of like a slap in the face. It's like it's intentionally trying to provoke anger in the fan base or something. Look, being intentionally provocative isn't always a bad thing. It can lead to some great things. I mean, some people really liked what they did with Metal Gear Solid 2. It's considered a masterpiece now, even despite the Solid Snake ride and bait and switch. But stuff that Chrono Cross does just feels haphazard, like implying that some of your favorite characters died, bringing some people kind of like child ghosts, like making people appear. Look, so many random characters are shown to meet grisly ends in Chrono Cross. It all feels kind of pointless and mean-spirited because in the end, the plot has basically nothing really to do with the first game anyway. In the end, it's vaguely implied that you'll be able to undo all the bad things that happened, yeah, but that seems almost secondary to all the other nonsense going on in the game. In the end, most of the Chrono Trigger callbacks just feel arbitrary, like they were just put in under duress or something, like they had to do it. Maybe the director knew that the game was always going to be compared unfavorably to Chrono Trigger and was just really bitter about it. I don't know, but it's a weird one. Now at number 2, Final Fantasy X-2. Back in 2003, there was a lot of hate for this game. These days, people are more open towards it and what it offers as a kind of weird follow-up to Final Fantasy X. Yeah, it feels a little cheap, the fan service stuff is kind of embarrassing, and the story is fairly slight, but the job-based battle system is fantastic. I had a lot of fun actually just playing through this one for the RPG battles. But you might be asking, like, how does this game ruin the story of Final Fantasy X? Well, mostly it doesn't. It's not really until the very end does the game really go off the rails with this awful idea of bringing Tidus back to life. The whole story of Final Fantasy X-2 is meant to be about how Yuna moves on after he dies and the events of that game. His death in the original game gave so much emotional weight to the story, but at the end of X-2, they completely erase all that for a completely unearned, super happy ending. These games are supposed to be about accepting death as like this natural part of living, but they just had to have their cake and eat it too by bringing them back. Some fans try to rationalize all this by saying that maybe he's not actually back. like he's like a vision or something. But in the very same scene, they contradict that. Like, he is supposed to be alive again. That's canon, even though it contradicts the entire point of these games. They just wanted to give Yuna a happy ending. So to hell with boring stuff like themes. I get it. Yuna's awesome. We all love her. We all want her to live happily ever after, but still, it's just frustrating, and it's only made worse by the fact that this was always meant to be the plan. The ending of Final Fantasy X implied Tidus was coming back to life as well. So actually, it's not Final Fantasy X-2 contradicting the first game. The first game was kind of already messing up itself, crazy enough. Now at number 1, Half-Life Alyx. Look, let's talk about this one. There is no disrespect to this game whatsoever. Like, it is a masterpiece of VR design, and it is a great Half-Life game, but the ending is something, man. Half-Life 2, Episode 2 ended on a legendary cliffhanger. The Half-Life games aren't generally known for their stories, but that was an ending that demanded real proper follow-up. So of course, Valve zigs when everyone expects them to zag. The story of these games is already confusing enough, but now they decide to throw some time travel-y stuff into the mix. At the end of Half-Life Alyx, she encounters the enigmatic G-Man being held in containment by the Combine. And after freeing him, he offers to essentially undo the ending to Half-Life Episode 2, saving Alyx's father, which is exactly what happens.
This is the moment where you watch your father die. Unless...
What? Unless what?
Unless you were to take matters into your own hands.
Then the G-Man takes Alyx. How any of this makes sense, don't worry about it. Like, it's time travel, who cares?
We have struggled to find a suitable replacement. Until now.
No! I just want to go home. Send me home!
I'm afraid you misunderstand the situation, Miss Vance.
The game ends with you once again in control of Gordon Freeman directly after the ending to Episode 2, with a now alive Eli Vance swearing to go after G-Man to rescue his daughter. After so many years waiting for something, anything to give some closure after Episode 2, Valve decides to just throw the whole thing out and start over, I guess? Alyx is now gone, Eli is alive, and is now hunting after G-Man. It feels like it really undoes Episode 2 and makes everything more confusing, but maybe they're just trying to clean things up. Not to be a conspiracy guy, but maybe they're trying to clean up the plot a little bit to really set up a proper Half-Life 3 that doesn't hinge on some things about Episode 2 and what could have been Episode 3. I don't know. Still, those are 10 sequels that definitely changed up the story of the first game, probably for the worse, but this was an interesting video, and there's so many other games we could cram on here, so let me know what you think of these games, but also other games that should be considered in this. Maybe a Resident Evil, maybe a Devil May Cry. There's so many different types of games with crazy sequels that mess with things, so let us know what you think. If you like this video and you like talking games with us, clicking a like button helps us. We really genuinely appreciate it. Thank you for listening to us yap about video games every day. We'll see you tomorrow.